Yes, this is basic geometry. Your flat Earth geometry. Flat Earth geometry. This is basic geometry.
It is.
I called you a flat earther.
My name's Ramsey.
Insisting that your flat Earth geometry will work.
I'm familiar with the bubble, Morty. I also dabble in precision, and if you think you can even approach it with your sad naked caveman eyeball in a bubble of air, you're the reason this species is a failure, and it makes me angry.
Did he say a five-sided square, question mark?
You're a universal horizontal waterer.
You're drunk.
I called you a flat earther.
You want to experience true level? Do you? Yes. You want to experience true level?
That auto level is establishing a horizontal. That's just the way it is.
Because I've done the test with an auto level, which gives you a horizontal.
Yeah, it's gonna look super flat.
All right, come on. Wow, it's so.
Three coplanar points.
Oh Christ! Yeah, true level, bitch.
I called you a flat earther.
If you're into math, there's a certain shape where you could make a five-sided square.
Are you suggesting that horizontal can't curve?
Oh, everything's crooked. Reality is poison. I want to go back. I hate this.
What's his deal?
Morty. Go to school, Summer. I'll go in Morty's memory and do a little.
Ranty, come on, that's a globe. He eventually just gave up and said, yeah, I agree, it's a globe.
Geodesic is a continuous string of infinitely small straight lines.
Yeah, true level, bitch.
It's really flat and level now.
Ranty, come on, that's a globe.
Yeah, true level, bitch.
Ranty, come on, that's a globe.
Lance to the cosmic slaughter! Well, you seem to be in charge of what I get to remember. Why? Good question.
Ranty, come on, that's a globe.
I'll go in Morty's memory and do a little. Wow, it's so. Oh my god! Oh Christ! Yeah, true level, bitch.
If you're into math, there's a certain shape where you could make a five-sided square.
Ranty, come on, that's a globe.
Yeah, true level, bitch. Wow, it's so. Oh my god! Oh Christ! Yeah, true level, bitch.
I called you a flat earther.
True level, bitch.
I called you a flat earther.
True level, bitch.
I called you a flat earther.
Yeah, true level, bitch.
Person to think.
When you get to the end of this test and you have a result and you say level is horizontal and everyone says big whoop, that doesn't prove anything about the shape of the earth, will you then say yes it does?
No.
No, okay, I'm going to bed.
Okay, so you
I'm going to bed.
that level is horizontal is good for you, then, right?
I agree level is horizontal.
Sweet.
True level, bitch.
Perfect.
Wow.
Nice, mate. Nice. Just for that. You flipped it, man.
Yeah, true level, bitch.
And we are live. I'm not too sure how long a show this is going to be today. Just to let everybody know, this is the stepping out of the the arena. Seems to be there is proof. Well, again, I say there is proof. If anybody wants to come and disagree or whatever. But what we are about here on the level is finding proof for yourself, and it seems like there aren't too many people within the arena that we've been placed. So personally, I'm done with this arena, and I'm fine going to find people that will entertain a proof conversation within logic, philosophy, and proof within reality. It's pretty obvious that some people can't understand this, the aspect of proof within reality. And the proof project is starting full. Well, it's been ongoing for a few years now, but completely done with a ridiculous. We've just been listening to, I don't know what to call it. It's hard work. People talking about. I know that within mathematics, models have been dealt with and been necessary, really, within modern mathematics. Well, really, we're about reality and proofs within reality. So the models will only be for the actual tests that will get performed within reality. Overall models aren't really needed within this, other than scale models of actual tests to be able to describe things within reality. So that's where we're at. That's where I'm at. And we've got this thing. Let me get the do you have it? So this is what I'm going with on the proof front. Some questions. Yeah, we're going with the proof thing. No, leave it like that. I don't know what flat earth math's talking about. Wait, why have we got flat earthers talking about surveying for engineers? What's he talking about? Crazy flat earthers. Yeah, so can you prove something? Question. If you can prove something, what can you prove? What is proof? And is proof to be found in reality? So the proof for things within reality, level, horizontal, can either of those be proved within reality? And is anybody going to take up the challenge? Can anybody take up the challenge? Does modern science allow for proofs within reality? Or just mathematical proofs? And is it possible to mathematically prove level or horizontal? Could you prove one and not the other? Within reality? I state, yes, you can. And over the coming weeks, months, there will be some arguments being put out. Now, I know people are going to talk about surveying manuals or whatever. But I mean, that's not a proof. That's just a book. So can you prove these things? You can prove a book exists by going, there's a book. But does that prove that level or horizontal are whatever they are? Now, I state within standard logic, within the basics of logic, there is an identity of something. So you can identify level and you can identify horizontal, but within logical form, I would say you can predicate level of horizontal and also predicate horizontal of level. That's because they are the same thing. There's no difference from one to the other. Now, if you can prove one, then you could prove the other in, I'd state, in reality. But that's the first question is, do you think, now no, it's not a question for me, because obviously I say that I can prove that. So this isn't a question that I'm asking myself. I'm saying, everybody else out there, what do you believe it is possible to have a proof within reality? And do you know what holding that proof is and how you would achieve that, gaining that proof? Serious question. More of a philosophical view, but this is obviously something that should exist within reality, I state. I'd state that a proof isn't a proof if it exists in an imaginary place. So I've got this. See whether I can just make it a little bit bigger. Right, let me get this. So, can you guys see that?
We can see it in Discord, yep.
Okay, let me just move it over a bit so I can get rid of a few things. It's a bit cluttered. Okay. So this is see that? Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. You guys can't really see that on the YouTube. No. This is Aristotle's logic. When we say Aristotle's logic, what we're saying is this is the guy that wrote the basics of logic. Now, that may sound a little bit strange. It's like somebody writing the basics of mathematics. Like, who is that guy? Well, this is where most of the stuff came from. Aristotle. Now, I'll read a bit of this because it's a bit it might give you a bit of an insight from Stanford. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with all of this. I'm just reading this out. It says Aristotle's logic, especially his theory of the syllogism, has had an unparalleled influence on the history of Western thought. It did not always hold this position. Right now, you think about that for a statement, modern day times, right? One guy, back in the history, people have obviously heard of him, Aristotle, and his logic and the theory of the syllogism, that's just a way of putting an argument together, has had an unparalleled influence on the history of Western thought. So how much are we aware of what you're thinking? Because apparently, according to Stanford, the history of Western thought has been influenced by this guy and the way logic is derived. Now, I mean, I'd say logic's there before the Aristotle. Logic is logic. This guy's wrote how best to use what is in an order for gaining knowledge, because that's all it's about. This is the best way for you to gain knowledge, and I'm guessing to not be lied to, because being able to understand logic means you can normally sniff out a liar or an untruth, let's say. You can see fallacies much better if you have a good understanding of logic. This guy wrote the book on how to make the most of the methods that you can employ. So, it did not always hold this position. In the Hellenistic period, Stoic logic, and particularly the work of Chrysippus, took pride of place. However, in later antiquity, following the works of Aristotelian commentators, Aristotle's logic became dominant. Aristotelian logic was what was transmitted to the Arabic and the Latin medieval traditions, while the works of Chrysippus have not survived. This unique historical position has not always contributed to the understanding of Aristotle's logical works. Kant thought that Aristotle had discovered everything there was to know about logic, and the historian of logic, Prantl, drew the corollary that any logician after Aristotle who said anything new was confused, stupid, or perverse. During the rise of modern formal logic, following Frege, Peirce, adherents of traditional logic, seen as the descendant of Aristotelian logic, and the new mathematical logic tended to see one another as rivals, with incompatible notions of logic. More recent scholarship has often applied the very techniques of mathematical logic to Aristotle's theories, revealing, in the opinion of many, a number of similarities of approach and interest between Aristotle and modern logicians. So Aristotle came first, but his teachings and his writings went through the Arabic land and then came back through Latin, as we had a discussion about on Saturday.
Yes, not all, because some of his works were unknown and came back through our, let's say, Arabic word, but
yeah,
some of them were always here. So there are, for example, organon. I think it was already in early medieval times, so it didn't come to us from Arabic, but some works were arriving from Arabic, but which were unknown.
The works are just basic logic. You know, it's nothing that other people couldn't have worked out. It was just, it's like Euclidean geometry. The basic components are all there. They just need writing down. Now, Euclid wrote the formulation of geometry through logic perfectly into an axiomatic system. Aristotle did exactly the same for logic and ethics, and he did other things as well. But what we're talking about here is the formulation of logic and how knowledge was gained through the use of logical means, and the best way of doing that, i.e. through law of identity, law of the excluded middle, and the law of non-contradiction. Later people added on different other things as well. So we're talking about the difference now between what they're going to call Aristotelian logic or Aristotle's logic, but I would say this is just basic logic. This is as basic as Euclidean geometry is to geometry. You can add other things to it and you can add other thoughts to it, but this is at its core just about as basic as you can get. But modern times, I'd say there's a problem, because Aristotle didn't have other people to compete with, really. Taking it back to the beginnings and taking Euclid's geometry as a basis, there's not much of a way that you can compete with that. And that competition, modern day, has how many incompatible, contradictory views from many different philosophers that have built on different things and contradicted each other, and modern day's a mess. People can see that all of these ideas that have been lumped on top of one another have just ended up causing mass confusion for when anybody can think anything at the minute and be able to think back and link to a philosopher that had those sort of ideas. That wouldn't have been possible back in the day of Aristotle. So what we're talking about is just the basic formulation. If you want to start at the beginning of logic for a foundation, then this is where you go. Similar to geometry. If you want to learn logic, I'd say look into geometry, because geometry will give you the foundation that sort of links perfectly with Aristotelian logic or Aristotle's logic.
I especially like this Prantl statement that anything above or in this modern is confused, stupid, or perverse.
Yeah.
I like it very much.
Yeah, that just during the rise of model formal logic, following Frege and Peirce, like modern formal logic, following Frege and Peirce. Adherents of traditional logic and the new mathematical logic tend to see one another as rivals. So there's a split between this new modern logic and the old traditional logic. That's pretty prevalent today, modern times. Sure, everyone can understand that. And this is how methods of proof. This would be how proof was gained. Classic proof before Bacon came around and decided to remove deductive logic. This is how to form. This was the rule book, not really the rule book. That's a bit bad, isn't it? The the instruction manual, really. But this is where I sort of think, and I don't know if anybody else is like this, but where I sort of think that when Plato had this idea of, I forget what he called it, that you were born, you already knew everything before you were born. So when you come to gain knowledge, it's like remembering something that you already knew. And that's the best way I can describe logic. Sometimes it seems so simple that when you hear it, it's as though you already knew it, but you would be hearing it for the first time. To me, that's what logic is like. It should, and it does for me. It flows naturally. And if it doesn't do that, then I'm questioning it. So I will go through a few of these things. Now, this is the introduction as it goes through here. And I think this is a bit... It says, Aristotle's logical works contain the earliest formal study of logic that we have. It is therefore all the more remarkable that together they comprise a highly developed logical theory, one that was able to command immense respect for many centuries. Kant, who was 10 times more distant from Aristotle than we are from him, even held that nothing significant had been added to Aristotle's views in the intervening 2 millennia. Whether it was that long, I don't know. In the last century, that's in the last century. So nothing's changed for 2 millennia. And then in the last century, Aristotle's reputation as a logician has undergone 2 remarkable reversals in the last century. The rise of modern formal logic, following the work of Frege and Russell, brought with it recognition of the many serious limitations of Aristotle's logic. Today, very few would try and maintain that this is adequate as a basis for understanding science, mathematics, or even everyday reasoning. At the same time, scholars trained in modern formal techniques have come to view Aristotle with new respect, not so much for the correctness of his results as for the remarkable similarity in spirit between much of his work and modern logic. As Jonathan Leap has put it, Aristotle shares with modern logicians a fundamental interest in meta theory. His primary goal is not to offer a practical guide to argumentation, but to study the properties of interferal systems themselves. And that sounds a bit contradictory to me. But, hey, just a normal person. But it does say, very few, I mean, I don't know. It says, in the last century, Aristotle's reputation as a logician has undergone 2 remarkable reversals. By who? His reputation. I mean, what about if somebody's never even heard? Yeah, if somebody's never even heard of Aristotle, like maybe a couple of people that are listening now. You know, like, how could it have gone through a remarkable reversal, and what would they be thinking about this in the last century? And the rise of formal logic following Frege and Russell. Now, we're going to have to go over this sort of stuff. This is where try-thinking's actually going to go into the try-thinking. I'm going to enjoy all of this bit from now on. I'm into gaining these proofs, but also trying to study what's going on with this. Why are these people saying that a remarkable reversal? I mean, how can you have a reversal of logic proofs? Doesn't sound possible to me.
I would say that it is just denial, not a reversal, because some people now are just denying Aristotelian proofs. And they say that this proof does not prove. So, but Aristotelian logic stands still. But some people are just denying that. It doesn't change anything, at least for me.
Yeah, not for me either. I mean, Aristotle, if it was just one person, it's just a guy that put a guideline down. That what Aristotle said doesn't stop me from understanding what a proof is to me and being able to explain that proof at all. So why they trying to say that you know, that there is no replacement? They're just saying it's gonna under. I mean, well, I'm gonna have to work out what all of that is about. But then it says during the rise of modern formal logic following Frege and Russell brought with a recognition of the many serious limitations of Aristotle's logic. Today, right, wait a minute, let's get this. Today, very few would try to maintain that it is adequate as a basis for understanding science, mathematics, or even everyday reasoning. Well, let's start with science. A black swan. Would somebody try and get, because the black swan's definitely Aristotelian. It's a modus tollens, right? That's definitely. So why are these people here saying that that isn't today sort of for understanding science? Now, I'm trying to still stick with the Aristotelian science, the gaining knowledge, and knowing that the modus tollens is a valuable method.
I would say that because now science is based on probability, and generally Aristotle rejected probability as the weakest proof you can have, and he didn't put that in real science, because science for Aristotle was certain knowledge, not probable knowledge. So probable knowledge, okay, if you cannot have better, then you have to go with probable proof. But if you can have certain knowledge by syllogism, then you cannot replace syllogism with a probable proof or dialectical proof. But now science is using dialectical proofs and probable proofs. So this is against Aristotle. And they say that this is a new approach, and because Aristotle didn't adhere to that, it means that he was worse. No, he was just sticking to real science.
Well, I don't understand why they're saying, you know, it's gone through a reversal. I'm not too sure you can have a reversal of proof. Like, you can't remove a proof, can you?
No, I would say not. But of course, Kant and René Descartes and others, they were undermining.
But they didn't reverse a proof, did they? Now, like when it says through mathematics, right? Mathematics. The basics of mathematics follow entirely from this Aristotelian idea.
Yes, but certain knowledge you can gain by syllogism and deductive logic. So when Francis Bacon came and he was trying to inverse this process into induction, that for me this is this reversal.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get at here is that where it says very few would try and maintain that it is adequate as a basis for understanding science, mathematics, or everyday reasoning. Like, who are these very few?
I would say that these few are just not going with modern logic.
But no, like, no. Let me start again. It says, today, very few would try to maintain that it is adequate as a basis for understanding science, mathematics, or even everyday reasoning.
Yes, so there are some few people.
So we are the few people.
Yeah, I would say yes.
Right. So what they're trying to say is that Stanford are going to go along with the idea that most people would say that modus ponens, modus tollens, the transitive law of equality, all of that sort of stuff, excluding the middle, the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, all of that sort of stuff wouldn't apply. That's not a very good way to explain everyday reasoning. There's a better way. Because I don't know what it is. I'd love to see the people that would try to argue against that for everyday reasoning. Basic mathematics, science, understanding of everyday things. I mean, do people give up that easily when somebody says that they disagree with them? Do they literally just fold and say, well, we can't use logic because very few people would say that that's worthwhile in everyday usage? And even though it says that Aristotle shares with modern logicians a fundamental interest in meta theory, like it's so similar to modern day logicians, yet they saying that very few people would go with it. Is that academics, or are they talking about everyday people? Or everyday people at these universities?
Maybe. I'm not sure. These are very vague statements.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm here to say that these basic ideas are for everyone. I mean, if these guys don't want it and they want to go into this new modern stuff, which I think is wrecking education, it's wrecked the education system, and it's going to wreck people's minds because it's handing people too many contradictions. People aren't aware of contradictions and the damage that they can actually do to the mind. People should be aware of contradictions and a way of understanding contradictions, fallacies. Because if you're not aware of them, then you can easily be tricked. Everything becomes a magic trick. Sophisticated magic tricks, just with words. And then it goes through all of these other things. Obviously, the Aristotle's work with the organon. We will be going over that as a separate piece, because well, it is how, not just how we understand science and logic and all of that, but this is how we are able to communicate with other people. The law of identity being placed through the grammar, the logical form, being able to use the words to place them into sentences in a structure where you can make syllogisms, and then being able to portray that through rhetoric. It's all within the organon. So I would say not just a work of logic within a book to structure logic, but it's also worthwhile being able to communicate with each other. The organon is basic, should be basic educational instruction, really. And on sophistical refutations, being able to spot fallacies. It's all there. And then we've got the subject of logic, syllogisms. Might be worth going over, because this is how we've derived proofs. Aristotle derives proofs, but I'd say this is a natural way of putting statements together. I'll read it. It might get a little bit it might get a bit too much, and I think we can go back to the old Raven video. So thank you, Raven, once again for bringing the trivium and the organon to back into modern logic. They've tried to get rid of this sort of stuff, tried to hide it, sweep it under the carpet, say that other people have gone over it and dismissed it. Well, they just haven't. That's the way modern science works, because we're talking about old science, the science with a little s. There's no capital S in science here. This is the old gaining of knowledge. It says all Aristotle's logic revolves around one notion, the deduction, syllogismos, a thorough explanation of what a deduction is and what they were comprised of will necessarily lead us through the whole of his theory. What then is a deduction? Aristotle says a deduction is speech, logos, in which certain things have been supposed, something different from those supposed results of necessity because of their being so. So I'll read that again, because I probably said it wrong. A deduction is speech, logos, in which certain things have been supposed, something different from those supposed results of necessity because of their being so. It doesn't even sound right. But hey,
it is. For me, this is golden sentence.
Yeah. Something different from
Yes,
those
conclusion
supposed results of necessity because of their being so.
Yes. So the premise is different than conclusion, because otherwise you will fall into tautology.
Okay.
So that's why you can gain knowledge, new knowledge. You know something new from syllogism. You are not just repeating a truth about premises, but conclusion is something new. So, and it's inevitable conclusion. So premises are establishing conclusion by necessity. So
yeah,
even
sorry.
Let me, one sentence. So even if someone is rejecting conclusion, but if conclusion follows from premises, this conclusion is there. despite if someone is denying or not. It doesn't matter. Completely is worthless because conclusion is already there.
I was just going to say, in terms of this sentence on the screen, certain things having been supposed, that's the premise they're talking about. And something different from those supposed, results of necessity, meaning that the conclusion necessarily follows from those premises. That's how I read it.
Yes, necessarily, yes. That's why I said inevitable conclusion, not just conclusion, inevitable.
And they
have to be.
It has to, because of the premises being so.
Yeah.
The premise actually is what you say, like it is actually true, what the premise is.
Yes, so if premises are true, then conclusion is true by necessity. So you cannot reject conclusion if premises are true, and syllogism is valid and formally valid and true, then conclusion is true, and no one can reject it, in fact, in logical way. Of course, someone can say nah, but this is not a refutation of syllogism. This is just nah.
Okay, so it says each of the things supposed is a premise, pretatis, yes, of the argument, and what results of necessity is the conclusion. The core of this definition is the notion of resulting of necessity. This corresponds to a modern notion of a logical consequence. X results as a necessity from Y and Z. If it would be impossible for X to be false when X and Y are true, we could therefore take this to be a general definition of valid argument. Now, I think the X and the Y's and the Z's lose it there.
Yes, I don't like letters. I like examples.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to work things out, but not the idea of putting X's and Y's and Z's mathematically together as though that's the sort of, but that's the new modern logic, isn't it? The modern mathematical logic that they were talking about, the from Frege.
Yes, but generally, if this Y and Z is true, it means that it is impossible for X to be false. So, for example, you can establish that first premise, let's say, is true because second premise, middle term is true and conclusion is true. Therefore, first premise has to be true also. So you can reverse that, because normally we say that if first premise and second premise are true, therefore conclusion is true. But if we know that already that conclusion is true, then we can establish also that premise is true. So we can reverse the process of syllogism.
And I hope we've got a bit to say about this as well, because this is, it says Aristotelian deductions and modern valid arguments. We've heard this quite a bit within this server anyway. We don't particularly agree, and this is probably where the differences may be, and that it's worth noting. The differences. It says, despite its wide generality, Aristotle's definition of deduction is not a precise match for a modern definition of validity. Some of the differences may have important consequences. One, Aristotle explicitly says that what results of necessity must be different from what is supposed. This would rule out arguments in which the conclusion is identical to one of the premises. Modern notions of validity regard such arguments as valid, though trivially so.
Okay, so it means that circular reasoning for modern logic is all right. For Aristotle, it wasn't. Because they, in this first point, paragraph, they stated circular reasoning. Because if premise is the same as conclusion, it means that this is a circular reasoning. So for modern logic, circular reasoning is, and begging the question is all right, not for Aristotle.
I don't know whether it says it's okay, because they do try this weaselly way, I think, modern.
No.
It
they
says
say
it says validity. Modern notions of validity regard such arguments as valid.
As valid, yeah.
Though trivially so. So they're just sort of, they get out of it, say, well, you can say it, but trivially, you know.
Yes, but this is a circular reasoning is creating tautology.
Yeah,
and this
they're
is
saying
not proof.
You can trivially call it valid, which just means you can say that it's valid.
But it doesn't prove anything.
Yeah. It doesn't really help. There's a difference, right? Aristotle went, nope, we can't do that. And modern logic say, yeah, you can. Because modern logic likes to have these contradictory ideas, I think.
No, you're right, because it's even stated Aristotle's definition of deduction is not a precise match for a modern definition of validity. So that means when Aristotle is talking about validity, modern definition is not the same. So in terms of the law of identity, they would not be the same, even though they're using the same word here.
Yeah, some of the differences may have important consequences. Well, this is a consequence where modern people allow it and traditional logic doesn't allow it.
Yes, so look at Bebby. He was when we were talking about validity and he was talking about validity, he was talking about different validity. So we are speaking two different languages. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, this is coming from this statement, a thorough explanation of what a deduction is. A deduction is speech in which certain things have been supposed, something different from those supposed results of necessity because of their being so. That's basically what we're dealing with here. It's that one statement. And they're saying, well, yeah, maybe we can have them the same. And it says something different.
Yes, because if it is not different, it means that you have a conclusion equals a premise. And this is circular reasoning. So Aristotle said, no, it cannot be a proof because you have to have a proof. In circular reasoning, if you are repeating premise and conclusion, you are just making circular reasoning, and it is not proving that your premise is true.
Well, I wouldn't say that it was Aristotle that said no. I'd say it's modern logicians that say, why can't we can have circular reasoning? Like, why can't we have circular reasoning? Let's have let's us modern logicians, let's have circular reasoning being valid.
Yes, but this is formal logic fallacy. So they include logical fallacies into their modern logic. Okay, I am not going with that at all.
That's the difference between modern logic and this old traditional logic, though, right? It's been built into modern logic to allow for fallacious deductive reasoning.
Yeah, it appears that, yes, they include fallacies into modern logic, which is sad for me.
Yeah. One of the main differences, like you say, some of the differences may have important consequences. Well, this is a pretty important consequence.
I can't even see how you could call it an argument if your conclusion is the same as your premise. Like, how could you even call it an
It's listed as a
argument?
fallacy. In the
Yeah,
sophistical reputations. It's in there. These guys are saying, well, let's take it out of that bit there. Put it back in this bit. It's bad. And then it says the plural, certain things have been supposed, was taken by some ancient commentators to rule out by definition arguments with only one premise. Aristotle himself says in some places that nothing new follows from just one premise. So let's take that again. The plural, certain things have been supposed, and was taken by some ancient commentators to rule out by definition arguments with only one premise. And Aristotle himself says in some places that nothing new follows from just one premise.
Yes, nothing new because it is circular reasoning. So you are going back to first premise. You are starting with first premise and you are ending with first premise.
But what's that saying? Is that saying that, you know, modern logicians are going to have arguments with one premise?
Yes, so they are just circle jerking. And this is for them science. For me, this is just circle jerking. But for them, it is science.
I'm not sure what this says. Like, what is the conclusion of this point number 2 here? It seems like it's not saying anything.
No, it's just saying what they did in the olden days, right?
Yeah.
But they're not saying there's a difference, or, you know, they're not following on with some sort of a statement about modern times. They're not going to let you know, unless you're meant to deduce that yourself, that
right.
that new ones, they just want one premise. It's like just
yes. So these commentators commented at Aristotle, and they rule out by definition arguments with one premise, because Aristotle himself said that you cannot obtain new knowledge from one premise, because you are creating syllogism to learn something new or to prove something new, to know conclusion. That conclusion has to be certain. That's why before in upper paragraph he said by necessity. It follows by necessity. So if from first premise the conclusion is first premise, it means that it follows by necessity. This is just nonsense. But if by necessity it follows new conclusion, you are gaining knowledge. And this is first sentence, I think, in metaphysics that people desire to know. So he is fulfilling this desire of man to know. How to know? To create syllogism. But if you are stuck in first premise only, you cannot gain new knowledge. So for Aristotle, it was not science, not logic.
I mean, they're only talking about some ancient commentators. They don't even mention where or who made these commentaries or anything. But if if this is an if we follow from the first point here that the conclusion can be identical to the premise, and you can have only one premise, and it also be valid in modern logic, you could say a banana is a fruit, therefore a banana is a fruit.
Yeah.
Like, how does that make any sense as an argument? It doesn't. It's ridiculous.
That's why Aristotle said nothing new can come of it. You're just restating the same thing.
Yes, and
that makes sense, right?
Yes, and that's why this that kind of quote unquote arguments were ruled out by definition. So if you are stating the circular reasoning, it is ruled out by definition as non-argument.
Yeah, if we take it back to the simplest argument you could possibly have is if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Right? Well, if all you've got is if A equals B.
Yes, if A equals B, therefore B equals A.
Yeah.
Yes, this is circular reasoning. Yeah.
That's literally that one put into a thing. But what it seems to be saying is a difference. The Aristotelian deductions and modern are valid arguments. So they're saying, I think, I mean, I don't want to put words in their mouth here, but I mean, it seems to think that modern logicians can say if A equals B, and
then B equals A.
Yeah.
And for them, for modern logicians, it is valid argument. Yes,
yeah, well
this is valid argument.
Well
Brilliant logic. You passed at the exam.
Valid as fuck. Let's have some of that logic. I mean, difference between modern logic and old school logic, I guess.
Wait, so if a banana is a fruit, then a fruit is a banana?
Yeah. This is not,
wow.
This is nonsense, of course.
Yeah.
This is illicit minor. So, in fact, you have to create tautology, real tautology, because otherwise you will create illicit minor. Because not all fruits are bananas.
Yeah, it's not worth even going into that, is it, really?
Yeah. This is just nonsense.
I think everybody understands that that's nonsense.
Yeah. And remember, this is like a university sort of going over. I mean, it's basic, but next one. The force of the qualification because of their being so has sometimes been seen as ruling out arguments in which the conclusion is not relevant to the premises.
Non sequitur.
Yeah, like you don't have a non sequitur as a conclusion. I mean, obviously, but hey, you can't be ruling that out in modern logic, can you? Got to allow for a valid non sequitur. E.g., arguments in which the premises are inconsistent, arguments with conclusions that would follow from any premises whatsoever, or arguments with superfluous premises. That's modern logic.
Yeah.
These three examples are allowed in modern logic. That's what they're wanting to say here.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
It's like anything goes in modern logic, really.
Yeah.
I mean, they were saying, look, it says, some of differences may have important consequences. Well, I'd say so, seeing as all he said was a deduction is speech, logos, in which certain things have been supposed. Premises. Something different from those supposed results of necessity because of their being so. So something different happens from the beginning bit because necessity of it actually happening. Right? It is required to happen that these things make this other thing happen.
Yes, it means that if premises are as such, it means that conclusion has to be this way, no other way. That's it.
Yeah, and what they're trying to say here is that formulation of the basic deductive things is you can mess about with it.
Yeah.
Literally, like one sentence, really, structured sentence, explaining exactly what a deductive argument is. They're saying, well, you don't necessarily have to have something necessarily following. I mean, it could be a non sequitur, could just be one statement, really, that doesn't really have a conclusion to it. It just, it basically, you can have anything. It doesn't even have to follow. And I'd say that there's some pretty important consequences from modern logic, from the old understanding. Is there any wonder we struggle communicating with certain people when their idea of modern logic, you know, when people say modern times, right, they say, well, by your logic that means, well, literally anything goes, really. Modern logic, you can do whatever you want. Seems like it.
Yes, so if we are talking, for example, about model of someone, and I say that your model is begging the question, and opponent says, well, so what? So what?
Yeah, within modern logic, that would still be valid, starting off with begging the question, because the premises can be inconsistent, apparently. The conclusion could follow from any premise whatsoever.
Yeah, non sequitur.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. Put anything together. I mean, you could find some way, sophisticated way, to make anything happen, I think, with this formulation of modern logic. I'm not in favor of modern logic, as you might guess. I'm going to stick to the old stuff, the one that can make sense, right? Because I don't think you could make sense of a modern logical argument. I don't see how it would be different and how you could challenge a proof in the old syllogism, the old traditional syllogisms. I don't see how they could be overwritten by modern logic. It's not better. It's not reformulation. I don't think you can do it. It's similar to Euclidean geometry. I don't think you can modernize what is already there as a proof.
No, you cannot.
I would agree.
I would say that you cannot use modern logic reading Aristotle, reading Euclid or St. Thomas Aquinas, for example. You cannot read that works using modern logic because you will not understand anything at best. It would be a mess, complete mess, because you would not understand proof. Because if proof can be non sequitur statement, then you will take non sequitur as a proof, and it is not present in old school, let's say, scholastic logic. So I would say that many people could find these works, like Aristotle, Euclid, or St. Thomas Aquinas, oppressive, because there were no fallacies there in reasoning. So,
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Evening.
So just hearing this, coming into this kind of blind here, are they explaining what these consequences are? Where it says that there could be some consequences to this? Are they explaining what the consequences are?
Yes, they're coming in a moment, I think.
Okay, I didn't miss it. Then that's good because I think we can certainly we can guess as to what the consequences are because we've looked at history.
Yeah.
At least in my mind anyway, I could definitely see the consequences of moving away from Aristotelian logic, a strict logic, if you will, to what these folks call modern logic today.
Yeah. Yeah, what you have to remember as well is that I'm new to, well, I think most of us are new to this sort of a thing, you know, like apart from perhaps Paper and Kevin. All of the philosophy, logic, geometry has been done in my later years, you know, within the last 4 or 5 years. The looking into the basics has happened with me, at least, and I think most people are still learning. I mean, I think we're all still learning. We all,
most definitely.
I mean, there's no way that you can know everything about all of this, what's gone on, and I particularly think that there is a model that's been given to people, and you base your understanding and new knowledge upon that model that you've already been given, and each step of the way gets given to you. It leads you on a path. Now, if you start in a strange place that's sort of halfway up the ladder and you don't have the foundations, then I think the understanding may not be founded upon anything solid. So you can build your own foundations in order for you to progress. And if you aren't taught these steps in the correct manner for you to understand them, I think you can be led down paths that you're unaware of at the beginning, and you know, you can find yourself in aporia quite quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like the analogy of going halfway up a ladder and thinking that's, you know, that's where there's no base, there's no foundation, there's nothing that the ladder is sitting on. So you can just ignore it and say, well, I kind of hanging in midair on this ladder. This is nice. We could do whatever the hell we want, and just ignore the fact that there's a foundation that should have been you know, that should have been followed from the very base of that knowledge to where you are at that point. But that's the hubris of man, isn't it? In my opinion, anyway.
Yeah.
The way I've looked at it over, you know, I started looking at philosophy maybe in my late 30s, so I'm probably almost 20 years into this now. Seriously though, in the last year or 2 years, because of all you guys, I've learned a ton as well. Just the history and being able to format it in my mind. But I think it's you can almost see, not almost, for me, I can absolutely see why these things were done, why modern had to become modern, because it's so easy to control people that have no foundation in logic. It's very, we saw that again over the last 4 years of madness that the world has seen, and kind of the normies opening up their eyes to what's gone on. You can see how easily people are controlled when they have no foundation in any of this stuff.
The idea, isn't it, that if you start modern day, then there is no foundation. Like you're literally midway up the ladder with no idea how many steps there are down, what sort of foundation that ladder's built on, whether it's actually going to hold you up. You've got no idea. And that's most people modern day times, because none of us have been taught the foundations. Literally. No one. When I came into this, I didn't have a clue what Euclidean geometry was. It was just geometry. So to find out the foundations that were missing, and I'm humble enough to state that, like, I knew nothing about it. I do now, because we've looked at the basics, and even now there's more to understand within the basics. The advanced simplicity is endless, really. People say you're still here, and it's, well, we still haven't formulated this solid grounding, and more people keep joining. We have to stay where we are to try and help ourselves and others understand this basics, the foundation, before we start climbing the ladder. Sorry, Jackie.
I just also wanted to back up Kevin real quick, because of nowadays you could potentially have a situation where somebody hands out conclusions. Some people will then take that conclusion as being fact, and as they say here, that conclusion could be derived from inconsistent premises or any premises whatsoever, or even argument with superfluous premises, which means that the person who has taken that conclusion as true can, in any way they choose to, justify that conclusion, even though it's fallacious, even though it's inconsistent, whatever have you. It's all allowed in modern logic, apparently. That's absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah. All allowed. Or at least it's making it seem as though it's allowed. Which I think's half of the battle, isn't it? Within the word. So, I mean, anyway, it says here, of these three possible restrictions, possible restrictions, though. So what they're saying is that those three things that they've gleaned from the statement Aristotle about deductive reasoning, he says of those three possible restrictions, the most interesting would be the third. It's the one we've just been going over. This could be, brackets, and has been interpreted as committing Aristotle to something like a relevance logic. In fact, there are passages that appear to confirm this. However, this is too complex a matter to discuss here.
To me, this makes no sense, because Aristotle came before modern logic, right? So you can't then make these differences from Aristotle to modern and then
to relevance logic. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, what
and-
is relevance logic? I mean, you have to mind your P's and Q's. The Q is relevant to the P.
It has to be.
No, I would say that this is extrapolation. So they are discussing how Aristotle fits or misfits today's modern logic. This is extrapolation. So I wouldn't bother with that much. For me, it doesn't matter what people think about Aristotle and how he fits modern logic. I'm happy with that he does not fit.
Yeah. Well, it's not he doesn't fit. It's modern logic has changed from Aristotle's way, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not going to go against Aristotle's logic personally. I mean, if there's a proof that can be gained through Aristotelian logic, can't be undone with modern logic.
That's like saying modern water or something. There's no modern, there's logic, period. That's it.
Well, it is like calling it, say, with the mathematics. When you're thinking of basic mathematics, it's basic logic, it's 1 + 1 is 2. Same sort of thing, but they're saying, well, perhaps you could have 1 as being something a little bit different. And maybe you could just get rid of the 1 + 1. Just say 1. It says, however the definition is interpreted, it is clear that Aristotle does not mean to restrict it only to a subset of the valid arguments. This is why I've translated syllogismos with deduction rather than an English cognate. In modern usage, sorry, go on.
Yeah, because yes, because I was struggling. Why he is saying that syllogism is deduction. A syllogism is just 3 sentences into one. So you have three sentences, like first sentence, all men are mortal. This is first. Second, Socrates is a man. Second sentence. And the third, therefore, Socrates is mortal. Third. So three sentences into one. If all men are mortal, and if Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This is syllogism. Three sentences linked together into one. But he's saying that this is deduction. Yes, it is, but this is just an argument. I would say that syllogism is argument. He is trying to explain why he is using that, because I have read further what he is trying to say, but it doesn't make any sense for me. But let's read.
Yeah, but we'll go on to the premises, structures of assertions. Syllogisms are structures of sentences, each of which can meaningfully be called true or false. Assertions. In Aristotle's terminology, according to Aristotle, every such sentence must have the same structure. It must contain a subject, and a predicate. And a predicate is something that is said of the subject.
Yeah.
And must either affirm or deny the predicate of the subject. Thus, every assertion is either the affirmation or the denial of a single predicate of a single subject. I mean, that makes sense. Keep your topic specific and say something of it, and then either affirm it or deny that thing that you're talking about. Makes complete sense, and it sounds like the best way to gain knowledge about a particular thing. That sounds brilliant to me.
I would agree. And you can imagine if you were to put a lot of superfluous statements within the same sentence of a premise, you would have trouble dealing with the murkiness of the sentence, number one. But the superfluous stuff you put in there could be separated into its own syllogism anyway and wouldn't belong, in the first one.
Yeah, if it wasn't needed, then why add it in? Because people can relate that to the proof and think that the consequence came from that superfluous thing where it didn't.
Yes, so they would think that it is because of that. So adding this redundant, let's say, predication is useful for sophists to make appearance that this conclusion is following from that premise. So there is causation here, where while there is no causation there.
And I would say this goes either way. Like if the predicate that's superfluous, even if it's true, it doesn't belong. If it is true, you could use it as the predicate in a separate syllogism.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it doesn't belong. It shouldn't be there.
So it's on interpretation, one of Aristotle's works. Aristotle argues that a single assertion must always either affirm or deny a single predicate of a single subject. Thus, he does not recognize sentential compounds such as conjunctions and disjunctions as single assertions. This appears to be a deliberate choice on his part. He argues, for instance, that a conjunction is simply a collection of assertions with no more intrinsic unity than the sequence of sentences in a lengthy account, e.g. the entire Iliad, to take Aristotle's own example. Since he also treats denials as one of the two basic species of assertion, He does not view negations as sentential compounds. His treatment of conditional sentences and disjunctions is more difficult to appraise, but it is, at any rate, clear that Aristotle made no efforts to develop a sentential logic. Some of the consequences of this for his theory of demonstration are important. Well, I don't even know what a sentential compound is, but I'm taking it. It's just that he's
modern logic.
Keep it simple, right? And then you can't go wrong with Aristotle. He states a subject and then predicates something of the subject. Then he either affirms or denies that predicate. That sounds pretty simple. That, to me, is probably why Aristotle kept it like that, because on those basic premises that are obviously you can follow along with it, nobody can trick anybody. It's pretty hard for a sophist to stick to that thing and try and get away with a lie.
Yep. Just to give an example for anybody that's listening, going back to our very simple cat analogy that we always often use with these kinds of things, it's hard to say. Sentential compounds is just a simple compound. So it's like if you would say the cat is black and has whiskers, right? That's a compound that you're putting in. It's one sentence. It's fine in English, but not so much for a syllogism, because you have to say one thing about one subject.
Yeah.
Yes, I would refer to this the so-called modus tollens of QE. If the Earth is a sphere with radius, etc.
Yeah.
So we have two predicates. And in fact, his modus tollens is referring to radius only, not to the shape of the Earth. That's why, in Aristotelian sense, that would be invalid, because this is what Aristotle was trying to avoid, not to multiply predicates, because people can be lost in predicates and will not know that proof is referring to a second predicate and not to the first.
Right.
But for example, in QE example, his conclusion is referring to first predicate.
Yes.
To shape of the Earth. But
that's
in
a
fact,
great example.
In modus tollens, he's making this modus tollens for radius, but conclusion is for shape.
Yeah.
So it is non sequitur, because he is using two predicates in conditional. That's maybe he just confused himself and many other people, but that's it. What Aristotle said: don't multiply predicates. Deal with one subject and predicate.
Keep
That's
it
all.
simple. Some of the consequences for this, for his theory of demonstration, are important. I'd say so. Subjects and predicates of assertions are terms. A term, horos. That's pretty close, that, to logos, isn't it? Term. Can be either individual, e.g. Socrates, Plato, or universal, e.g. human, horse, animal, white. Subjects can be either individual or universal, but predicates can only be universals. Socrates is human. Plato is not a horse. Horses are animals. Humans are not horses. The word universal appears to be an Aristotelian coinage. Literally, it means of a whole. Its opposite is therefore of a particular. Universal terms are those which can properly serve as predicates, while particular terms are those which cannot. That we've been saying that we need to go over these sort of things, because I think in order for us to understand and learn how to communicate, I know people are going to think we're being more picky with our words, but this is in order for us to communicate effectively, this is definitely the way that we are able to do it.
Do you remember, Bev, when we were going through the porphyry tree and we were talking about, and there was the piece about predication, and we were trying to wrap our heads around the fact that you can't predicate in the opposite direction of the porphyry tree. In other words, right, you can't predicate the specific of the generic, right? It has to be the other way around. That's exactly what this is saying. And it's absolutely true. But at the time we were like, what the hell does that mean? How do we wrap our heads around this? But now it's just like, yeah, it's second nature. You just go, yeah, absolutely.
I still think it needs to be gone over, because what we're trying to do here is, obviously, this sort of stuff has been modern logic, right? Has taken, it seems it's taken what should be simple and tried to confuse the shit out of it.
Indeed.
And what I think, what we want to be doing, or what I want to be doing, is to bring it back to the simplicity, so more people can understand it as well, the more people the better, really, the most people, to get a grip on this basic logic, and then people can learn it for themselves, so they can gain what I'm considering I've gained from learning this myself. I'm a much happier person within myself, knowing that I can know things.
Okay, we have here explained in this, for example, Socrates is human. So Socrates is particular, but predication upon Socrates is universal. And you cannot exchange that. You cannot say that human is Socrates. This similar thing we have with horses are animals. Of course, horses are not particular, but they are more particular than animals. So we have this minor and major. So horses are minor and animals are major collection, let's say. So horses belong to animals, but we cannot say that animals belong to horses, because larger cannot belong to smaller. So that's why you have to have specific order with predications and subjects. So that's why he's saying that universal terms are those which can properly serve as predicates, while particular terms are those which cannot. So you cannot, that's why you cannot say that human is Socrates, because is Socrates would be predication. So particular cannot apply to human in that sense. But in other way, you can say. So Socrates, subject, particular subject, and universal predication is human. You cannot inverse that.
I think if we go back to Raven's presentation on this, where he went over this about genus and species and how to make proper definitions of things, I think this, relates very, very well to that conversation.
Yeah, when you think back, Kevin's right. When we think back to what we gained when Raven came and did that presentation, I mean, it was amazing. It was almost too much, but I thank him for it every time. That we're here mainly thanks to Raven. So
agreed. I am super grateful, and in his depth.
And that's why I think it's worthwhile if you're out there listening, thinking, I would like to get involved with that. Just come in. You could be another Raven. You could be inspirational. That's what we're looking for. All of this sort of stuff, with these little links that Logos gives us. Raven was definitely given to us from Logos, so come on in, get involved. I'm going to keep going through this because this is a build up to tomorrow. There is going to be, apparently, we're doing the level horizontal proof project. It's starting on full logic and reasoning, philosophy. That's where the try-thinking channel's going now. It's taking a step out of where we've learned our trade, and we're literally going our own way now. It says, consequently, predication for Aristotle is as much a matter of metaphysics as a matter of grammar. The reason for that term, Socrates is an individual term and not a universal, is that the entity which it designates the reason that the term Socrates is an individual term and not a universal is that the entity which it designates is an individual, not a universal, which makes white and human universal terms is that they designate universals. Further discussion of these issues can be found on the entry in Aristotle's Metaphysics, another one of Aristotle's works. Affirmations, denials, and contradictions. Like I will state again, we're going over this because this is how we gain proof, or how I gain proof, or how I have gained proof. Once challenged about finding a proof and could I present a proof, I took that challenge on. So I've derived a proof for myself. Now, other people don't have to accept it, and I'm fine with that. I have my own proofs, and I'm happy with those proofs. I'm hoping other people will be able to gain their own proofs and gain an understanding of what the process at least is. We're doing this because there is claimed to be a proof from Aristotle coming. I think we're saying Bede's proof from Aristotle coming up the Blue Marble Science channel tomorrow. We will be having a watch party. I will not be going live at all tomorrow. So if anybody wants to come round, come into the On the Level Discord. We might come back
at what hour?
I don't know. I think Bede's doing his presentation. I don't even know. If somebody can let us know in the chat if you know that Blue Marble's scheduled it for what time it is scheduled. But I think it's Aristotle's proof. Might have something to do with level and horizontal. I don't know. That's why we're going over this tonight, Aristotle specifically. But it does fit nicely with the idea of proof and how proof's gained. Now, I don't know how modern logicians derive proof, because it seems like they can formulate any old sort of argument. So I don't know how proof's to be derived modern times. This is affirmations, denials, and contradictions. Aristotle takes some pains on interpretation to argue that every affirmation there corresponds exactly one denial, such that that denial denies exactly what that affirmation affirms. Wow.
Yes, it means that there would be not misplaced concreteness, because some time you can just deny allegedly the same predication, but in fact you are denying something different, and so, some people may not spot that, and they are just saying that I am denying this concrete predication, but in fact they are denying something else. So it has to deny the same. For example,
yeah, it could be the black cat with whiskers.
No,
he's just denying the whiskers, not the black cat.
No. I am talking about different. For example, I have example. There is, for example, a difference between brightness and color. So you can say that contradiction or denying white should be not white, but so you are denying color. But if you are denying, for example, brightness, you can say that white in opposition to black, but you are talking about two different predications. In first sentence, let's say you are talking about just denying not white, you are talking about color, and if you are saying that white in opposite to black, you are talking about brightness, because white is opposite to black only in brightness, not in color, because blue is just not white as any other color. But you can easily confuse predications. One of them would be brightness, and the second, very similar, would be color, but they are not the same.
I don't know whether they're the pair consisting of an affirmation and its corresponding denial is a contradiction. See, I don't want to sound stuffy and all of that, but this is where there's got to be some sophistry in this, or it takes a little bit of getting used to for the word usage of. They were obviously brighter people back in the day, but the words and the way that they use these words, even some of the words have been changed to modern times to what these ones. The pair consisting of an affirmation or its corresponding denial is a contradiction. In general, Aristotle holds exactly one member of any contradiction is true and one false. They cannot both be true and they cannot both be false. However, he appears to make an exception for propositions about future events. Though entrepreneurs have debated extensively what this exception might be. The principle that contradictions cannot both be true has fundamental importance in Aristotle's metaphysics. Yeah, that's the law of non-contradiction.
Yep. So I agree with you. There seems to be some sophistry happening here to get around the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah.
That's what it appears to me.
Yeah, that's why I gave this example of white, not white, and for example, white and blue. So white is in contradiction to blue, or white to yellow, or whatever color you prefer, because we are talking about color. So any color that is not white would fit this opposition or contradiction. So you can say blue is not white, orange is not white, whatever color you pick up. But it is not contradiction if we are talking about brightness, because yellow is similar in brightness to white. So we are changing whole category. So in that way, it would be contradiction, but in other way, you have to set up contradiction in other way. So if you are talking about brightness, contradiction would be only from of white would be black. So blue would be not contradictory if we are talking about brightness. But if we are talking about color, it is just not white. So that's why he's talking about this pair consisting of an affirmation and its corresponding denial. It has to correspond. So people are very often confusing contradictions, and they see something as contradiction which is not, and sometimes they cannot see contradiction where there is contradiction in terms. So that I would say that there is a problem from modern logicians also here.
Yeah, there's a sophistry. It's the sophistry wrote in it.
Yeah, but I don't disagree with what Paper's saying here. I think it is interesting, though, following that explanation about contradiction, that there's this carve out for apparently attributed to Aristotle about propositions about future events. So I don't know how Aristotle would have been wanting to discuss anything with regards to future events or whatever that means, right? Anything in the future.
There's a troubling question about a battle in the future. I think it was one of Zeno's that they tried to play on. So this is the fact that he appears to make an exception for propositions about future events. Well, I'd state that he wouldn't try and make predictions on future events, right? You could say that one or the other might happen. But you can't make a prediction about it, and you can't. What they're trying to say here is that make an affirmation and a contradiction within the statement. You can't have both of them being true, right? There cannot be two truths.
Yes, I agree with this statement, because if something didn't happen or haven't happened yet, so you cannot say that this is false or true because it hasn't happened.
Yeah, I don't think he would even predicate upon it, like, because you can't.
That's what I would say. Yeah. That's what I would say.
That's the sophistry within it. And from that little bit of sophistry, they're trying to say that you can have two truths, i.e. both of the contradictions being true. The affirmation and the contradiction. Only one of them can be true. But they're trying to say that there is a case that Aristotle seemed to allow these both to be true, which I
would disagree, because you don't know the future, so that's the case. So you cannot distinct which one is false and which one is true, because they haven't happened yet. That's all I would say. I am not. I would say that's my logic on that. But maybe I will find somewhere in Aristotle what he's saying, because sometimes there are some difficult sentences in Aristotle's work, and they are twisted by modern interpreters, let's say, because we have this word. Though interpreters have debated extensively, etc. So this debate among interpreters does not mean that they are right, that they have read Aristotle correctly.
Then it goes into all, some, and none, which obviously is a bit modern. It's like that's where the modern one major difference between Aristotle's understanding of predication and modern, i.e. post-Phrygian logic, is that Aristotle treats an individual's predications and general predications as similar in a logical form. It's just a logical form, but we're adding in some.
Yes, but this table is not very. I don't like these letters, but
No,
he is talking about examples that Socrates is an animal and humans are animals. So Socrates is talking about
like papers.
examples.
Like Kevin was saying when Raven came and showed us that you can't work backwards. Well, that's all this is, and I think this is one of the ways that modern logicians play on the. We've already had it, haven't we, from a certain dogmatician. It's a very sophisticated. We'll get round to him because this is the new modern type logic, although it does have its roots also in the organon. The syllogistic. This is quite cool. Goodness. Aristotle's most famous achievement as logician is his theory of inference, traditionally called the syllogistic, though not by Aristotle. That theory is in fact the theory of inferences of a very specific sort. Inferences with two premises, each of which is a categorical sentence having exactly one term in common and having as conclusion a categorical sentence, the terms of which are just those two terms not shared by the premises. Aristotle calls the term shared by the premises the middle term, and each of the other two terms in the premise are an extreme. The middle term must be either subject or predicate of each premise, and this can occur in three ways. The middle term can be the subject of one premise and the predicate of the other, the predicate of both premises, or the subject of both premises. Aristotle refers to these term arrangements as figures. So he's calling it a figure which is related, I think, to the geometric figure, whereas you're relating these things to a common term. So you're making a figure. You're sort of relating them within a triangle. You have to make that connection to make the figure.
I slightly disagree because this is schemata, so this is schema. And these figures are just patterns of letters.
Yeah.
But I cannot see here geometry because this, for example,
I'm just determining the figure as like placing them in a system that you can relate to. You're relating certain a thing to two other things.
Yes, in that way, yes. Maybe there are some geometrical schemes for these figures. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's how I relate it together, right? The actual figure of this is making that relationship of what a geometric figure is. You're relating points to other points to make a figure, and this is doing a similar sort of way. You're relating a thing to other points. As you will, with words. But like I say, I think geometrically, so that's the way I place all of this together. He arranges the terms as figures. That's what he calls it. So the syllogism is the middle term. Is if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. The middle term is B. And it can be, like he says, it can be related in any way to these other ones in different forms, the similar form. It's the basic of how you gain knowledge and relate things together. You make connections between related things that may not seem related, but they are related to a common term, the middle term.
Yes, and that, for example, in this first figure, so premise A, predicate, and subject B, and this subject B is an second figure. It is a middle term, so that would be B. So it is, and this middle term is absent in the third figure. It means in third sentence, because we have predicate A and subject C. So these predicates A are present in all. I am talking about the first line, where we have A, B, A, B, A, C. So A is predicate and is present in all three sentences. Predication, for example, white. Cat is white, whatever, white. This A is in first sentence, in middle term, and in conclusion. But the subject is in first premise and second middle term, and it is absent. So we are, for example, predicating the same thing in two sentences, and this same predication with this predication we are going to see. So now what we were predicating upon B, we are predicating upon C. So we are just transferring this predication on C, because C is subject. The B was subject in first sentence and second sentence. And now this in the third sentence, in conclusion, we have C instead of B.
Yeah, that's the form of, what did you call it? The transitive law of equality.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's
First
basically
axiom,
to me. Yeah, he's just showing how you can do it in all different ways, like you went over earlier, paper with the syllogism being able to be flipped either way. And here he just shows it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty simple, and that's what Aristotle, his most famous achievement, right? We go to this next bit now, is methods of proof, which is pretty relevant to what we're talking about. A proof project. Aristotle's proofs can be that. So Aristotle had proofs. Aristotle was allowed to have proofs. It's wrote down here. Aristotle's proofs can be divided in two categories based on a distinction he makes between perfect or complete. Deductions and imperfect or incomplete deductions. A deduction is perfect if it needs no external term in order to show the necessary result. What's it got? 24b 20. I don't know. Is that pages? I don't know. Might get to that in a bit. And it is imperfect if it needs one or several in addition that are necessary because of the term supposed but were not assumed through premises. The precise interpretation of this distinction is debatable. Is debatable. Wow. There's Aristotle's proofs, but the precise interpretation of this distinction is debatable. But it is, in any rate, clear that Aristotle regards the perfect deductions as not in need of proof in some sense. For imperfect deductions, Aristotle does give proofs which are invariably depend on the perfect deductions. Thus, with some reservations, we might compare the perfect deductions to the axioms or primitive rules of a deductive system. A slight bit of sophistry going on here. Anyone make any sense of that? Proofs can be divided into two categories based on the distinction he makes between perfect or complete deductions and imperfect or incomplete deductions. And a deduction is perfect if it needs no external term in order to show the necessary result. 24b. Let me just go. What are we on there? 6. Let me go and see if it goes to 24. No, it doesn't even go to 24. Don't think we've got pages on it, so no, I don't know what that is or where that comes from. With some reservations, we might compare the perfect deductions to the axioms or primitive rules of a deductive system. Are they going to say that the transitive law of equality is a proof?
It seems they call it an axiom or a perfect deduction.
Yeah.
He is talking about that if a premise is deducted from something else, you will need some corollary for that. So that would be imperfect if it is not self-evident. So if premises are not self-evident, like axioms, it would be, if it is not yet proven, that would be imperfect. Because you need additional proof to prove your premises that they are true premises. Because premises which are axioms, they are like, for example, common notions like all men are mortal. So, for example, so that would be axiomatic. So you don't need to prove with other syllogisms that all men are mortal, for example. So that would be a example of perfect premise, let's say.
Okay. Yeah, so you wouldn't need to prove that horizontal was perpendicular to vertical.
Yeah.
For instance, because that was already a given that horizontal is perpendicular to vertical. In the proofs for imperfect deductions, Aristotle says that he reduces each case to one of the perfect forms and that they are thereby completed or perfected. These completions are either probative, a modern translation might be direct. These completions are direct or through the impossible.
Reduction ad absurdum. So
yeah.
So Euclid is using several times.
Yeah.
And he says in conclusion, but this is impossible. So he is proving opposition by proving that this case is impossible. Therefore, opposition has to be true.
In the proofs for imperfect deductions, Aristotle says that he reduces each case to one of the perfect forms and that they are thereby completed or perfected. These completions are either probative, direct proofs or through the impossible, through reduction.
Modus tollens comes to mind, modus tollendo tollens, which is the mode of proving by taking away, right? So you're showing that, or how would you go about explaining it? You're showing that it can't be this, because this is, this is being taken away through argumentation, and then you can follow up and continue from there until you arrive at what he says here, the perfect forms, and that they are thereby completed or perfected after the process of going through the modus tollens or through the impossible.
It will all of these will come around when the proof is given, I think. This level horizontal proof project is going to be, how can we prove things in reality, and what is there for us to be able to prove within reality. These different ways. I'd be keen to see what modern logicians, how modern people prove things, or the outlook on how people would choose to prove things within reality. A direct deduction is a series of steps leading from the premise to the conclusion, each of which is either a conversion of a previous step or an inference from two previous steps, relying on a first figure deduction. Conversion, in turn, is inferring from a proposition which has the subject and predicate interchanged. Specifically, Aristotle argues that three such conversions are sound. It says he undertakes to justify these in I don't know where these things are. From a modern standpoint, the third is sometimes regarded with suspicion. Using it, we can get some monsters are chimeras. From the apparently true, all chimeras are monsters. But the former is often construed as implying, in turn, there is something which is a monster and a chimera, and thus there are monsters and there are chimeras. What? In fact, this simply points up something about Aristotle's system. Aristotle, in effect, supposes that all terms in syllogisms are non-empty. Are you sure? I don't know. Would Aristotle have done some logic about chimeras being monsters? Really?
No, he is saying because if we can create, for example, that all chimeras are monsters, we have to assume that chimeras exist, and monsters exist. So because if one of them is not true, we cannot predicate. If monsters don't exist, we cannot say that chimeras are monsters, because there are no monsters. And if chimeras don't exist, but monsters exist, we still cannot say that all chimeras are monsters, because chimeras don't exist. So they are not monsters. And even if chimeras exist and monsters exist, then we can say that all chimeras are monsters, because monsters would be genus and chimeras would be species.
So that's from a modern standpoint, right? You've just made an argument from a modern standpoint. What I'm saying is that Aristotle wouldn't have done that.
No, I would say that all chimeras are monsters means even this guy says that Aristotle in effect supposes that all terms in syllogisms are not empty. So you cannot have this all chimeras are monsters as an empty term. So it implies that chimeras exist and monsters exist. They have to exist, both genus monsters and species chimeras. So you have to have these two monsters, existing monsters, and existing chimeras, because otherwise this all chimeras are monsters would be empty term, empty sentence. That so, and Aristotle avoids that. He said that you have to suppose that chimeras exist. You cannot predicate on non-existing subject.
Yeah, it does say from a modern standpoint, the third is sometimes regarded with suspicion. Because they start talking about monsters and chimeras as an example. Well, that's not a reason why the third one is suspicious.
Yeah, because in fact we cannot confirm existing chimeras, and even if we assume that monsters exist, but we don't know that chimeras exist, so we cannot make that sentence that all chimeras are monsters, because that would be empty term.
And then,
so
I mean, look at the mess of this here. As an example of the procedure, we may take Aristotle's proof of chemistries. He says, if n belongs to every n, but not to x, then neither will n belong to any x. And it just goes on like that. Look at it. Look at how much mess there is here.
Yeah, that's why I don't like these letters, because I cannot just imagine that.
It doesn't make any sense, does it? It's not like an argument that I think I can't understand that. It means nothing. I'll just bypass that.
That's why I prefer real life examples, because it is, for me, it is telling, but letters not. So I don't like this modern language of logic with letters, because it doesn't vivify my imagination at all.
This one's disproof, counterexamples and terms. Aristotle proves invalidity by constructing counterexamples. This is very much in the spirit of modern logical theory. Ooh. Modern logic. Invalidity. Is that the nuh-uh? Not that. All that it takes to show a certain form is invalid is a single instance of the form with true premises and a false conclusion. Modus tollens. However, Aristotle states his results not by saying that a certain premise conclusion combinations are invalid, but by saying that a certain premise pairs do not syllogize. That is, that given the pair in question, examples can be constructed in which premises of the form are true and the conclusion of any of the four possible forms is false. When possible, he does this by clever and economical method. he gives two triplets of terms, one of which he makes the premises true and a universal affirmative conclusion true, and the other of which makes the premises true and a universal negative conclusion true. The first is the counterexample for the argument for either E or O conclusion, and the second is the counterexample for an argument with either A or I conclusion. Now, I say this, right, because it's claimed that there will be a disproof of the statement level is horizontal done by Aristotle tomorrow live by the proofless dogmatician over on Blue Marble Science channel. So that's what we would have to have. It sounds fancy, doesn't it? Does by a clever and economical method. He gives two triplets of terms, one of which he makes the premises true and a universal affirmative conclusion true, the other of which he makes the premises true, a universal negative conclusion true. So there's going to be quite a lot of stuff involved tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. That does sound quite clever, but all will become clear tomorrow. Aristotle's disproof for counterexamples. Syllogisms, and there's a bit about definitions. Demonstrations and demonstrative sciences. Demonstration is a deduction that produces knowledge. Aristotle's posterior analytics contains his account of demonstrations and their role in knowledge. From a modern perspective, we might think that this subject moves outside of logic to epistemology. From Aristotle's perspective, however, the connection of the theory of the syllogismi with the theory of knowledge is especially close. So the syllogism makes it into the demonstrative science, but science meaning of gaining knowledge. You gain knowledge through this demonstration of this syllogism.
Yes, so for example, yes, that is demonstrative proof, so or syllogism. Like, for example, this all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This is demonstrative proof for Aristotle. This is demonstration, because you have certain knowledge from that. Conclusion is certain, cannot be invalidated. If premises are true, both, conclusion is true. And this is for Aristotle calls it demonstration. Demonstrative proof.
Like proposition 1 in Euclid, right?
Yeah. Proof itself. It doesn't mean that it has to be demonstrated in physical reality. This is not that kind of demonstration.
But it does say that he reduces everything to something that's already known, right? He reduces your syllogisms to things that have already been proven. That way, you can build upon things that you already know to be proven, much like Euclid does. Proof on proof on proof. They just follow each other. And providing you can break it down to the most simple you can, then you can build from that by relating things that have been proved together.
Yes, so Euclid's proof are demonstrations. That's why at the end this is this QED. So quod erat demonstrandum, what was to be demonstrated. So proof, he demonstrated proof. So Euclid is operating with demonstrative proofs. Some people call it apodictive proof. So undeniable proof.
Aristotelian sciences. The subject of the posterior analytics is episteme. This is one of several Greek words that can reasonably be translated knowledge. But Aristotle is concerned only with knowledge of a certain type. So this will be explained below. There is a long tradition of translating episteme in this technical sense as science, bold science, and I shall follow that tradition here. However, readers should not be misled by the use of that word. In particular, Aristotle's theory of science cannot be considered a counterpart to modern philosophy of science, at least not without substantial qualifications. So what you have to understand here is Aristotle had an idea of science as in the gaining of knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge. That's what science was to Aristotle. And these people here are saying that you can't really relate the gaining of knowledge to modern science without a few qualifications. You have to separate them, which I find rather telling that they have to do this. They have to make this qualification that this acquisition of knowledge is not relatable to modern science without a few, substantial qualifications. Aristotle's theory of science cannot be considered a counterpart to modern philosophy of science, at least not without substantial qualifications. That's pretty big. That's why we're here, I think. That's what's led us to this point.
Yes, and he is explaining what is the matter, because in next sentences, so it is worth to read.
Yeah.
It is very simple.
We have scientific knowledge, according to Aristotle, when we know, I like this bit, when we know the cause why the thing is, that it is the cause of this, and that this cannot be otherwise.
Yes, so
it's not
we
like
have
stating the same thing and being sure of what you're saying.
No, we have to know the cause, and we have to know that this cause must imply effect. Then we know, because of this causation is a solid rule. So if we have cause, therefore we have to have effect. This is not just cause that it might be or not. This cause might cause effect or might not cause effect. No, Aristotle is saying that this kind of cause must imply effect. When we have this relationship with cause and effect, so if we know the effect, we can also learn about cause.
It's almost like if P then Q, and you cannot have a non sequitur.
Yeah.
The problem in modern day, though, is the word no. That's the problem, because no has been substituted by I believe.
Yeah. Well, it's the science, isn't it? The idea of knowing comes from what he calls science, right? The ability of us to gain knowledge from something is this. You have to know this, right? You have to know the cause why the thing is, right? And that is actually the cause, and that it can't be anything else. I mean, that makes sense. That you know, once you know those things, then you can say that that is a knowledge that you've gained, that that was the cause of that thing.
Yes, for example, the cause of boiling water is heat, and it cannot be otherwise. So you cannot say that cold can heat water also. It is impossible. So the only cause of boiling water is heat. You cannot state any any
That's a bad
different
example to
cause.
pick, paper. That's a bad example to pick.
Yeah.
Why?
Because water can boil without heat.
Yeah, under negative pressure.
Yes.
Okay, so okay, not boiling, warm. Heat can warm water.
Yeah, much
Only
better
heat.
said. Much
Okay,
better said.
it's okay, because I was talking about boiling water in normal conditions, but let's say warm. You cannot warm water without heat. So heat, you have to apply heat externally, and that would be the cause of warming water. And you cannot have any other cause to warm the water. You have to have heat. That's it.
Yeah. So this implies two strong conditions on what can be the object of scientific knowledge. One, only what is necessarily the case can be known scientifically. And two, scientific knowledge is knowledge of causes. Now, I think modern science has an inability to see causes, I think. Or at least arguments can be made philosophically about the cause. Not surprisingly, because modern science obviously has a cause and effect, but has to do its modern science thing.
Yes, but still, this so-called scientific method is about cause. You want to know the cause, and you are presupposing this cause, for example, heat warming water. You are presupposing that, and you have to check, because this is your hypothesis. So hypothesis would be that heat is warming water. And in order to check your hypothesis, you have to check your cause. So you have to manipulate your cause, heat, to check if it is boiling, or sorry, warming. And you can conclude that water always warms when heat is applied. So you fulfilled this condition that this only what is necessarily the case. So this is only necessarily the case. You don't need other factors to warm the water, only heat. So we can know that for sure, that heat will always warm the water, always. So this is established cause by experiment, of course.
I've always heard the I mean, your heating water is new, maybe a little bit confusing, but the one that everybody knows is the billiard ball, because it's been played out by many people through many examples about the cause and effect, but it gets led back to the initial cause epistemologically. It gets awkward within modern science, this cause and effect relationship, and I've heard it many times through cue balls and snooker balls, billiard balls.
You have to apply force to the first ball to have this domino effect. So you need the stick and the guy with the stick.
Yeah, but they place you in the middle of the ball, causing the other ball. Right? They put you in the middle of that position in order to do this cause and effect. So the ball's already the one that causes the next one.
Yes, but you need to have the first cause, the first ball.
Yeah.
So if all balls are not moving, so you have to have first ball which is moving. So the first mover, let's say, you have to have the first mover. So the first ball would be the cause of all other movements. This is chain reaction.
He says he then proceeds to consider what science so defined will consist in, beginning with the observation that at any rate one form of science consists in the possession of a demonstration, which he defines as a scientific deduction. Scientific knowledge is knowledge of causes, right? So this is knowledge, science. It says by scientific, I mean that in virtue of possessing it, we have knowledge.
Yes, so basically, and very short, when you know answer why, you have knowledge.
Yeah, through the argumentation to have the proof, through demonstration, you gain knowledge, which is that whole procedure is termed science.
Yeah, why? Why it does occur.
Yeah, and once you've gone through that process, you are then in possession of science.
Yeah.
You personally.
Yeah, knowing the cause. So you can answer your question why. Because of that. So you know the cause.
It says the remainder of posterior analytics is largely concerned with two tasks. Spelling out nature of demonstration in demonstrative science and answering an important challenge to its very possibility. Aristotle first tells us that a demonstration is a deduction in which the premises are 1. True, 2. Primary, 3. Intermediate, without a middle, better known or more familiar than the conclusion, 5. Prior to the conclusion, 6. Causes of the conclusion. The interpretation of all of these conditions, except the first, has been the subject of much controversy.
But still, there is no description as sound. Baby was talking about valid and sound. There is no soundness here.
And this very thing here that there has been the interpretation of all of these conditions except the first has been the subject of much controversy. So this true bit here is what he's calling sound, isn't it? The bit that nobody has ever considered to argue and no controversy over it. It's just true.
Yeah.
The premises have to be true. Now, I think when we went over with Raven, when we first went over the trivium, I think there was much questions about this, about the idea of whether
controversy, you might say.
Yeah, yeah. Whether it has to be true, but I mean, this one says that there's been no controversy. All of the others, yes, but of this, no. Premises have to be true.
Yes, and even if you, because you can have premises of which you don't know if they are true, because, for example, like this chimeras, you don't know if they really exist or not. But even then, you have to assume that they exist, so that they are true, in order to process this whole syllogism. You cannot assume untrue premises. Never. Even if you don't know if they are true or not, you have to assume them as true, even in pure speculation. So if we are talking about unicorns, for example, and we are creating some kind of proofs for unicorns, we have to assume them to be true. And this is, of course, speculation only. But even in speculation, we have to keep that true value, even if we are predicating upon things that they are not existing, because otherwise we would land in empty term, and empty term is causing paradoxes. So you cannot use empty term. So you cannot pre-assume that thing is not existing, even in speculation. So they are always true, even if they are not true. You have to assume that them to be true.
Aristotle clearly thinks that science is knowledge of causes, and that in a demonstration, knowledge of the premises is what brings about knowledge of the conclusion. The fourth condition shows that the knower of a demonstration must be in some better epistemic condition towards them. The fourth one, better known or more familiar than the conclusion. And so modern interpreters often suppose that Aristotle has defined a kind of epistemic justification here. However, as noted above, Aristotle is defining a special variety of knowledge. Comparisons with discussions of justification in modern epistemology may therefore be misleading. Science. It's gaining knowledge through science, so you can't.
Yes, so this fourth point is about that these premises have to be better known than conclusion, because it would be just nonsense, because you have to prove that you know conclusion, and so your premises have to be already known. So, for example, if you are going to prove your premises, you are just making corollary proof around premises, and then when they are proved or previously proved, then they are better known than conclusion. So that's obvious, I think. I hope.
In fact, he says that the process of acquiring scientific knowledge is a process of changing what is better known for us until we arrive at that condition in which what is better known in itself is also better known for us. I like that. That makes sense. In fact, he says that the process of acquiring scientific knowledge is a process of changing what is better known for us until we arrive at that condition in which what is better known in itself is also better known for us.
Yes, so he's postulating checking our conviction about thing with a real thing. So if we are convinced that this is true, but this is only our conviction, we have to still to prove in objective reality. So he is comparing our subjective knowledge with objective reality. And when our subjective thinking is in accordance to objective reality, then we have better knowledge. And in fact, this is definition of truth, Aristotle's definition of truth. So he is making this link. Our thinking has to go with reality. And in fact, we have to prove what is in reality and not only what we think about reality. What we think about reality is not good enough. We have to check it with reality. Then we have solid true premise.
Right, the regress problem. And you have a problem. In posterior analytics 1-2, Aristotle considers two challenges to the possibility of science. One party, dubbed the agnostics by Jonathan Barnes, began with the following two premises. 1. Whatever is scientifically known must be demonstrated. 2. The premises of a demonstration must be scientifically known. They then argued that that demonstration is impossible with the following dilemma. If the premises of a demonstration are scientifically known, then they must be demonstrated. 2. The premises from which each premises are demonstrated must be scientifically known. 3. Either this process continues forever, creating an infinite regress of premises, or it comes to a stop at some point. If it continues forever, then there are no first premises from which the subsequent ones are demonstrated, and so nothing is demonstrated. On the other hand, if it comes to a stop at some point, then the premises at which it comes to a stop are undemonstrated and therefore not scientifically known. Consequently, neither are there any of the others deduced from them. Therefore, nothing can be demonstrated. I've heard that one before.
Yes, this is yes, this is very, very good dilemma, because it shows that we can stop. Of course, we have to stop somewhere, and this stop would be at axioms or common notions.
Yeah, you have to have a start, first premises, right? You have to start somewhere.
Yes, so for speculation, that would be axiom, but for, let's say, physical demonstration, or in physics, let's say, it has to be common notion. So what is self-evident in nature, let's say, because you cannot, in nature cannot occur things that are impossible or not actual. So you have to take common notions. as first principles in physical reality.
Does say in posterior analytics, Aristotle considers two challenges to the possibility of science, right? So these are challenges to Aristotle given by what dubbed as the agnostics, right? It says the second group accepted the agnostics' view that scientific knowledge only comes from demonstration, but rejected their conclusion by rejecting the dilemma. Instead, they maintained demonstration in a circle is possible, so that it is possible for all premises also to be conclusions, and therefore demonstrated.
This is circular. So they propose circular reasoning
Yeah.
as a resolving dilemma.
Yeah.
So,
well, they just rejected the dilemma and said we will replace that with circular reasoning. So at the one group, the agnostics said, like infinite regression. And then the other group said, well, we're going to deny that and just go for circular reasoning. Aristotle does not give us much information about how circular demonstration was supposed to work, but the most plausible interpretation would be supposing that at least for some set of fundamental principles, each principle could be deduced from the others. Some modern interpreters have compared this position to a coherence theory of knowledge. However, their position worked. The circular demonstrators claim to have a third alternative, avoiding the agnostic's dilemma, since circular demonstration gives us a regress that is both unending, in the sense that we never reach premises at which will it come to a stop, and finite, because it works in its way round the finite circle of premises. I don't think that's Aristotle. It's like other people giving their commentary on it, because it does have Aristotle's solution. That it's a little bit weird, that, isn't it?
No, dilemma, let's say, is given by Aristotle, but the solutions, this rejecting dilemma or circular reasoning, absolutely, I would say that it was not from Aristotle.
Yeah. Like the different people that gave different answers, this bit at the bottom, that's not Aristotle. It's got Aristotle's solution. Aristotle's solution, it eventually comes to a stop. Aristotle rejects circular demonstration as an incoherent notion on the grounds that the premises of any demonstration must be prior, in any appropriate sense, to the conclusion. Whereas the circular demonstration would make the same premises both prior and posterior to one another.
Which is impossible, yes.
And indeed every premise prior and posterior to itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, he agrees with the agnostics' analysis of the regress problem. The only plausible options are that he continues indefinitely, or that it comes to a stop at some point. However, he thinks both the agnostics and the circular demonstrators are wrong in maintaining that scientific knowledge is only possible by demonstration from premises scientifically known. Instead, he claims that there is another form of knowledge possible for the first premises, and this provides the starting points for demonstrations, i.e., Euclid. To solve this problem, Aristotle needs to do something quite specific. It will not be enough for him to establish that we have knowledge of some propositions without demonstrating them, unless it is in turn possible to deduce all the other propositions of a science from them. We shall not have solved the regress problem. Moreover, and obviously, it is no solution to this problem for Aristotle simply to assert that we have knowledge without demonstration of some appropriate starting points. He does indeed say that it's his position that we have such knowledge, but he owes us an account of why that should be so. Of course.
Yes, first principles. Yes.
Yeah. Knowledge
We
of
know
first
that
principles.
without demonstration. So, for example, greater is greater than so of whole is greater than part. We know that. Of course, we can demonstrate that, but knowledge about that is not physical demonstration. So you cannot demonstrate this principle. You can demonstrate only example in real world, but you cannot demonstrate this principle itself. So you cannot prove that, because demonstration for Aristotle is proof, is a syllogism. You cannot create a syllogism to prove that the part is not a whole, because this is axiom, principle of knowledge.
We're going to have to get into all of this sort of stuff. I quite like this. Knowledge of first principles. What's that? Nous, is that?
Knows.
What is that? Is that first principles?
Knows, it means like law.
Okay.
Law.
Yeah.
Or principle.
Yeah. The principles, yeah. Okay, Aristotle's account of knowledge of the indemonstrable first premises of science is found in Posterior Analytics 2:19, long regarded as a difficult text to interpret. Briefly, what he says there is that it is another cognitive state, nous, translated variously as insight, intuition, intelligence, which knows them. There is wide disagreement among commentators about the interpretation of his account of how this state is reached. I will offer one possible interpretation. First, Aristotle identifies his problem as explaining how the principles can become familiar to us, using the same term, familiar, that he used in presenting the regress problem. What he is presenting then is not a method of discovery, but a process of becoming wise. Second, he says that in order for knowledge of intermediate premises to be possible, we must have a kind of knowledge of them without having learned it. But this knowledge must not be as precise as the knowledge that a processor of science must have. The kind of knowledge in question turns out to be a capacity or power, which Aristotle compares to the capacity for sense perception. Since our senses are innate, i.e. developed naturally, it is in a way correct to say that we know what, e.g. all the colours look like before we have seen them. We have the capacity to see them by nature. And when we first see a colour, we exercise this capacity without having to learn how to do so. Likewise, Aristotle holds our minds have by nature the capacity to recognise the starting points of the sciences. In the case of sensation, the capacity for perception in the sense organ is actualized by the operation of the perceptible object. Similarly, Aristotle holds that coming to know first premises is a matter of a potentiality in the mind being actualized by experience of its proper objects. The soul is of such a nature as to be capable of undergoing this. So although we cannot come to know the first premises without the necessary experience, just as we cannot see colours without the presence of coloured objects, our minds are already so constituted as to be able to recognise the right objects, just as our eyes are already so constituted as to be able to perceive the colours that exist. it is considerably less clear what these objects are and how it is that experience actualizes the relevant potentialities in the soul. Aristotle describes a series of stages of cognition. First is what is common to all animals, perception of what is present. Next is memory, which he regards as a retention of a sensation. Only some animals have this capacity, even fewer have the next capacity, the capacity of the capacity to form a single experience from many repetitions of the same memory. Finally, many experiences repeated give rise to knowledge of a single universal. This last capacity is only present in humans. See section 7 of the entry on Aristotle's psychology for more of his views about mind. That whole bit, first premises, may sound a little bit weird, but if you take that as being the axioms within geometry, then it becomes a bit more understandable when you say that two straight lines cannot enclose a space is an axiom which is a first principle of geometry.
Yes, so I would struggle how to prove that. That's why it is called axiom, because we know that it is true, but we cannot prove it by means of syllogism. So it is a very good start as a premise. You can use that statement as premise.
I'd say you would struggle to try and put down anything to relate to first principles, that I would anyway, that isn't geometric. You can understand the Aristotle's problems of dealing with this sort of how to write down what a first premise is within logic, because logic is the first premise. Logic itself. I mean, when you go back to the beginnings, you're always dealing with logic and reasoning, and how do you go there?
Yes, for example, law of identity. So it cannot be proved that white cannot be not white. Yes. So it means that white cannot be at the same time not white. So this is law of identity, and we cannot prove that in the sense of demonstrative proof. We cannot make from that syllogism to prove that white cannot be not white at the same time and white. So this is just axiom. This is first principle. And you can use that as premise and in syllogism. But that would be, for me, this stop that Aristotle said that you have to stop somewhere in chain of premises. So for me, axioms would be good spot, and in physical reality, common notions.
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends what the subject is. You pick the subject and you revert that to first principles. You take it back as far as you can. Like, you will derive what the first principles are.
Yes, absolutely. You are right, because even common notions, of course, are necessary in physics, but still common notions are linked to first principles of reasoning. So you can go back to first principles of reasoning even using common notions. So the very first principles would be that axioms. That in absolute sense.
Yeah, the very fact that they are axioms means that you can't go back any further. That is as simple as you can get, taking everything as far back as possible. When we speak of first principles, that's what we're talking about. You should always start every proof from the first principle stage and build up proof on proof on proof. That's where you start from.
Yes, and that's the way of Euclid.
Yeah.
So if you are going, for example, in proposition whatever, let's say 40, proposition 40, book 1 or whatever, so you can go backpedal. You can backpedal to first principles. And there is a link between, because in next proposition, he is using already something that is already proven in previous propositions. So he's never jumping to conclusion. So you can always go back to first principles. And that's how logic works.
Yep. And then he goes back even further. I don't know whether this is in the correct order or it gets a little bit confusing because he's gone to definitions now, from first principles to the definitions. And it says the definition was an important matter for Plato and for the early academy. I think there's a bit of modern philosophy that we have to go over to the word within the definition concerning with answering the question, what is so-and-so, are at the center of the majority of Plato's dialogues, some of which, most elaborately the sophist, propound methods for finding definitions. External sources, sometimes the satirical remarks of comedians, also reflect this academic concern with definitions. Aristotle himself traces the quest for definitions back to Socrates. Definitions and essences. For Aristotle, a definition is an account of which signifies what is to be for something. Logos. The phrase what it is to be and its variants are crucial. Giving a definition is saying of some existent thing what it is, not simply specifying the meaning of a word. I think that's pretty important. Aristotle does recognize definitions of the latter sort, but he has little interest in them. The notion of what it is to be for a thing is so pervasive in Aristotle that it becomes formulaic. What a definition expresses is the what it is to be, or in modern terminology, its essence. That's important, I think, right? The phrase what it is to be and its variants are crucial. Giving a definition is saying of some existent thing what it is, not simply specifying the meaning of a word. So you are predicating something of the subject.
Yeah, proper predication.
Yeah.
Not just name, like fancy name. For example, we can have definition by name. For example, automobile, a car. But automobile is better because it means that this mobile is moving automatically. So that would be a definition in the name. But for Aristotle, it is good, very good. But I would say that that would be very good by name definition. Automobile, because, oh yes, of course, automatic motion. But for Aristotle, it is not enough. So sometimes it is sufficiently good, but in many cases it is not. So in fact, you have to have this good predication about thing.
Yeah, it's stating what the thing is, what it does, you know, like certain things like that within the definition. You don't just say it is this, because that doesn't really state anything about the thing, the existent thing. So it does say that, doesn't it? Saying of some existent thing. So you can't have a definition of something that doesn't exist. You can't just state that a ghost is a thing that you see, you know, when whatever, right? You can't define a ghost in Aristotle's way. You have to be able to have something existent to be able to then say something of it. You have to predicate upon that thing and describe it by the definition.
Yes, like Dodo, for example. So
yeah,
nobody have seen Dodo, so you cannot make definition what it is, because if it is not existent, you are creating empty term. And to empty term, you are adding definition of empty term, which is nonsense added to nonsense. So that would be very improper to do.
Wow.
Anyway, I think that I have to stop here because
time we are.
Going to bed. This is very, very condensated knowledge.
Yeah, this is.
Cannot process more tonight.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get over this tonight, and I'll have to just do this last little bit, and then you say this is all in preparation for a supposed proof coming from Blue Marble Science and Betty, the proofless dogmatician. So go over this.
Okay, I am off. Good night.
Thank you very much. It does go over these things, and we are going to go over them, the categories and stuff. We've already been over them a little bit with Raven. Not really related that much to I doubt it that anything that's going to come up tomorrow. Bit about arguments, the division, the definition and demonstration. Again, this might be relevant to proofs, how we do it. Closely related to this is the discussion in posterior analytics 2, 3 to 10 of the question whether there can be both definition and demonstration of the same thing. That is, whether the same result can be established either by definition or by demonstration. Since the definitions Aristotle is interested in are statements of essences, knowing a definition is knowing of some existing thing what it is. Consequently, Aristotle's question amounts to a question whether defining and demonstrating can be alternative ways of acquiring the same knowledge. His reply is complex. Not everything demonstrable can be known by finding definitions, since all definitions are universal and affirmative, whereas some demonstrable propositions are negative. If a thing is demonstrable, then to know it just is to possess its demonstration. Therefore, it cannot be known just by definition. Nevertheless, some definitions can be understood as demonstrations differently arranged. As an example of case 3, Aristotle considers the definition: thunder is the extinction of fire in the clouds. He sees this as a compressed and rearranged form of this demonstration. Sound accompanies the extinguishing of fire. Fire is extinguished in the clouds. Therefore, a sound occurs in the clouds. We can see the connection by considering the answers to 2 questions. What is thunder? The extinction of fire in the clouds, definition. Why does it thunder? Because fire is extinguished in the clouds, demonstration. As with his criticisms of division, Aristotle is arguing for the superiority of his own concept of science to the Platonic concept. Knowledge is comprised of demonstrations, even if it may also include definitions. The method of science is demonstrative, even if it may also include the processes of defining. Wow. Okay. And a dialectical argument and the art of dialectic. Aristotle often contrasts dialectical arguments with demonstrations. The difference, he tells us, in the character of their premises, not in their logical structure. Whether an argument is a syllogismos is only a matter of whether its conclusion results of necessity from its premises. The premises of demonstrations must be true and primary. That is, not only true, but also prior to their conclusions in the way explained in posterior analytics. The premises of dialectical deductions, by contrast, must be accepted. Oh, we can. I think pretty sure we can go over the rest of this at some other point. Oh, bit of a short show. Go back to Discord for a bit. That is us going over Aristotle. We've never really gone over much of Aristotle's works, although I do have a copy of the Organon, because obviously I like the idea of first principles. So I consider Aristotle as being the first principles of logic, but the first principles of logic are already there. As I said earlier, you just go back to the base of whatever you can, go back as far as you can with whatever, and I think you always end up with logic, and I don't think you can go back any further, especially for the gaining of knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge. Especially for proof, and as we're going over tonight, this idea of can you gain proof? What is proof? Does proof exist in reality? Do you possess any proofs within reality? I mean, modern times, who actually does? Some people think proof is only within mathematics, but I'd say proof exists within logic, not mathematics. You have to have a logical process backing the mathematics. So proof exists within logic. So this making arguments is the way for you to gain proof. these sort of first principles that are laid down by these old people are what gives us the chance to learn. Yes, mate.
Isn't mathematics built upon logic?
It is, yeah.
So therefore, mathematics, we can speak about mathematical proofs.
But
right?
the backing to those mathematical proofs will be logical. So you have to base it to first principles. You have to go back to the logic. So the proof will be a proof within a logical form. May be expressed within mathematics, but the proof will still be in a logical form. Always goes back to logic rather than mathematics. You can't form mathematics without the logic, so you underlying the mathematical proof must be the logical proof backing the mathematics.
Would you say logical proofs? Logical proofs, are they grounded in reality?
Yeah, they have to
or
be.
Must be. They have to be. So what about if I say 1 + 1 equals 2? So is it always true? Can you say, is it logically sound to say 1 + 1 = 2?
Yeah,
equal
because
to
it's
2?
equals, isn't it? You're using the equals to being able to add equals together. But who's defining what 1 is and what 2 is?
Ah, okay. I get that.
I mean, you could always say that 1 + 1 = 2, but actually proving it because you're having to define 1 and 1. It does get tricky, I think, with the mathematics and adding 1 and 1. Because
it is, because if in reality, right, you cannot sum two objects, right? Two physical objects cannot be physically put together, right?
Well, yeah, but you can have 1 apple and 1 apple and add them together to make 2 apples because they are existent. You can predicate that each apple is an individual, a 1. So, you know, like you can do that sort of thing, but you rely upon the logic to base the identity of each apple to be 1, a unit.
No, but I'm talking physically speaking.
Yeah, well, you would have 2 apples.
Yeah, exactly.
The apples exist, but
apples exist.
You can't call the apple 1. You have 1 apple, right? You're predicating the apple to be an individual.
I get them.
Okay, anyway, I'm going to end it here. Like as I say, we're not going to be round tomorrow, but we will be doing a watch party. Watching hilarity, probably. Anyone got any? Rob's not here. Buster. Anyone got any?
No.
Did one true. Well, let's have a triangle. I think this one still works. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. I think we will be back Wednesday with a trivium day. quantitatively you have 2 apples, each of them being unit. Yeah, sorry guys. Shutting off. If you want, like I say, tomorrow, anytime you want to come into the Discord's going to be more used. We do not record in the Discord. We just have proper discussions. So that's the place where you want to be. Click the button. Join the Discord. See you around there. We'll probably be back Wednesday. Thank you very much.
You call it a triangle axiom.
I do, yeah. Right, so you've managed to confuse a lot of people within that argument. Weird times, buddy. Because like you weren't trying to say that all horizontals are not parallel because you can draw a cross on a piece of paper.
I was temporarily agreeing.
That wasn't the argument.
For fuck's sake.
Because some people have took it as though that is.
I'm sorry. A separate discussion. Happy to talk about that one day. What I originally suggested, and Mike knows this, Mike Jones. We agreed we'd sort of discuss the fifth postulate first. And you call it the triangle last time.
I do, yeah.
I discussed the swimming pool. Thank you, Mike. Question.
Weird times, buddy.
Don't understand. Be quiet. Swimming pool. Thank you, Mike. Question. You don't understand. For fuck's sake. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mike. It's not my problem if you don't want to learn. Thank you, Mike. You're just on your own. Well, that I hold to be a self-evident. You call it the triangle axiom.
I do, yeah. Because it's got just about a triangle, yeah.
The question is, why did include that axiom? You call it the triangle axiom.
I do, yeah.
Why did you include that at all? You call it the triangle axiom.
I do, because it sort of shows that triangles have 180 degrees, right? Or the sum of 2 right angles.
You know? So you're saying... How does it show? Be quiet. Well, yeah, it does. I mean, you can prove that, but why did he include that? You call it the triangle axiom. If you can...
Oh, you can prove it?
Be quiet. If you can prove that triangles have... You call it the triangle. The sum of the angles is 2 right angles. Why would you need... For fuck's sake. I'm sorry, that's my question. You call it the triangle axiom. You don't understand. You call it the triangle axiom. You don't understand. I was temporarily agreeing. Be quiet. It's not my problem if you don't want to learn. Thank you, Mike. You're just on your own. For fuck's sake. I'm sorry. Horizontal lines can easily not be just as I suggested. You just sort of get a horizontal line. That I hold to be a self-evident truth. You put 2 crossing lines on them, and by definition, any 2 lines, straight lines on a horizontal plane, are themselves horizontal. Thank you, Mike. So that's the problem. You can't. Well, it's not really a problem. Yeah,
it's not a problem because there's only 3 straight lines. How fucking difficult can it be?
The point again is that you cannot prove it. A lot of people, you call it the triangle axiom. Millennia thought you could prove the 5th postulate. You call it the triangle axiom. The question is, do we need the enclosure axiom? Yeah, not on the globe hypothesis. I received opinions we don't need it because postulate 1 will do the job for you. And look, but I simply wanted to ask you why you think the postulate's there, and you have explained that. And you have explained that. Not on the globe hypothesis. That I hold to be a self-evident truth. I'm sorry. It's not my problem if you don't want to learn. Be quiet. You're just on your own. I'll be perfectly honest. I'm sure there are better people back at the other place, the blue place, who can prove this. And we're happy to talk to you. No logic, no wisdom, no worries. And you have explained that. You're just on your own. If you know. Logic, no answers to questions. And you have explained that. You're just on your own. Right? That I hold to be a self-evident.
It's a self-evident truth of reality that all triangles, in reality, have 180 or the sum of 2 right angles.
Be quiet. But not on the globe. Well, it's an assumption. For fuck's sake.
It's not an assumption, is it?
I'm sorry. For Euclid, it was an assumption because he knew he couldn't prove it. So huge debate which went on for centuries. You call it the triangle axiom.
What, that you couldn't
Millennia.
prove that triangles have 180
They tried.
degrees?
They thought there was a question: is the fifth postulate? You call it the triangle axiom. Triangle axiom. Is it self-evident or not? Huge debate.
Weird times, buddy.
Thank you, Mike.
Weird times, buddy. You've brought an argument into a group of people that aren't ready for it.
Be quiet. You can't. You cannot. Euclidean geometry. You call it the triangle axiom. Does not follow. It doesn't work. But not on the globe. I don't need it as an assumption because we can prove it. You can prove it from the first postulate. For fuck's sake. Horizontal lines can easily not be. You can just, as I suggested, you just sort of get a horizontal plane, right? Thank you, Mike. You put two crossing lines on them, and by definition, any two lines, straight lines on a horizontal plane, are themselves horizontal. For fuck's sake, I'm sorry. You don't understand. Well, that I hold to be a self-evident truth. For fuck's sake. If you could prove it, it wouldn't be a postulate. It's not my problem if you don't want to learn. You're just on your own. You call it the triangle axiom.
I do, yeah. Because he's got just about a triangle, yeah.
The question is, why did Euclid include that axiom? You call it the triangle. That postulate or axiom. Why did he include that at all? Thank you, Mike.
Because it sort of shows that triangles have 180 degrees, right? Or the sum of two right angles.
But not on the globe. You're saying, for fuck's sake. How does it show? How does it show that? Well, yeah, it does. I mean, you can prove that. But why did he include that? Be quiet. If you can.
Oh, you can prove it.
You call it the triangle axiom. If you can prove that triangles have the sum of the angles is two right angles, why would you need postulate? That's my question. I will not verbally disagree with it. What goes on in my own head is my own business. I do not believe that. Be quiet. You don't understand. You call it the triangle axiom. For fuck's sake, I'm sorry. It's not my problem if you don't want to learn. You're just on your own. Yourself, not something to be quiet. You have a horizontal plane, and any straight line not on the globe must itself be horizontal. That I hold to be a self-evident truth. Yeah, not on the globe hypothesis. I was temporarily agreeing.
Right, so you've managed to confuse a lot of people within that argument.
I was temporarily agreeing.
Because you weren't trying to say that all horizontals are not parallel because you can draw
not on the
cross on a piece of paper, are you?
Thank you, Mike.
That wasn't the argument.
Not on the globe.
Because some people have took it as though that is.
For fuck's sake. Separate discussion. Happy to talk about that one day.
Yourself, not something to be quiet.
Point again is that you cannot prove it. A lot of people, you call it the triangle axiom. Centuries, millennia, thought you could prove the fifth postulate. You call it the triangle axiom from the preceding thought. Be quiet. I was temporarily agreeing. Not on the globe. You call it the triangle axiom. Not on the globe. It's not my problem if you don't want to learn. Be quiet. Just on your own. Well, that I hold to be a self-evident truth. For fuck's sake, I'm sorry. No reason, no logic, no wisdom, no worries. And you have explained that. You're just on your own. Not on the globe, you know. No reason, no logic, no answers to a question. And you have explained that. You're just on your own.
Betty, do you believe the water surface is a horizontal plane of reference?
It's a horizontal plane, possibly, but not on the globe. Let's assume.
Thank you.
The surface of either swimming pool is a horizontal plane. Establishes a horizontal plane of reference, right? Let's assume.
Thank you.
The surface of either swimming pool establishes a horizontal plane of reference. Right? It's not really a problem. Yeah,
it's not a problem because there's only 3 straight lines. How fucking difficult can it be?